Good morning.
Good evening.
I was afraid you'd forgotten all about this.
No, I just haven't advertised it because sorry, haven't advertised it because I don't have a guest. So I don't know what's going to happen. If it'll just be you and me chatting about old times or something.
Well, there are a bunch of Smiths that I'd like to see show up. I mean, Phil Smith and Adrian Smith and Bob Smith.
Yep,
Is Fiona a Smith?
she is. We also have a Richard Smith at dialogue.
Oh, yes. Mhm.
So
That would be fun.
do all the Smiths together.
Be different.
So yeah. I don't know what exactly is going to be, and it's really hard to get people to come. And by the way, I'm totally um for doing something that's under your name as well. I don't mind, so that you can count a meeting a year.
Yeah, that would be a help to the APL bug. I'm trying to get Paul to provide at least a little abstract to put out as a notice.
So what I have lined up, let's see. Let's see who's next week. I do have somebody on the schedule.
There you go, Paul Jackson.
Paul Jackson, yeah.
Yeah,
But that isn't that through you?
that sort of threw me. Yes, I mean he's local, but I need to have something to put into an announcement to send to the APL bug, and the APL bug announcements go to the whole world. So
Yeah, so why don't so make something up that's so vague that you can't go wrong. Paul Jackson, known for such and such and such, will be speaking about the history of APL.
I will have to give him a suggestion. I was kind of hoping he might actually come this morning to see what's in the APL campfire.
Yeah, well, you have 4 weeks to it, but even such
Yeah.
a thing should be enough of an abstract, no?
Right.
Since it's even such a thing, it's just saying that Paul. I don't know much about him, but you probably know more. Even such a thing as saying that Paul Jackson, known for this and this and that, will be speaking about the history of APL and his
Yeah.
involvement. That's good enough so that you can advertise something.
Yes.
And then if he wants to make it more precise later, then he can do so. Um, and then we'll in. Do you have a logo? Not an APL logo.
Well, we don't have a logo that we're using for the APL bug now.
No.
Once upon a time, one of the editors of the newsletter, uh, you know, put kind of a baby buggy as a logo for the buggy,
But you're part of ACM, right?
yes, we're an official local chapter of the ACM.
Okay, so can I use the ACM logo?
Yes, you could actually.
So what if when we begin to advertise it, then I'll not just use the what you see behind me, the APL Campfire banner, but add a little
Mhm.
ACM logo at the corner to make it like official that
Oh, that'd
that
be neat.
that you it's part of what you're doing, and then write the ACM and then APL bug or something like below it.
Mhm.
Although, so APL bug is part of the sixth plan chapter on array programming languages, or how does that work?
There is no longer an official SIG APL as
No,
such.
that's a long time ago. I remember.
Unfortunately,
Yeah, but
we're,
it
we're,
became a chapter of
we're
SIG
a
plan,
local
right?
chapter. Yeah.
But is that what APL bug is? Isn't that the Bay
And the APL
Area's user?
Bay users, I mean, the official name for the APL Bay Area users group is something like the Northern California chapter, maybe the Northern California APL chapter of the ACM. I can't even remember what the official name is because it's and I try to stick to the APL Bay Area users group, which predates the affiliation with the ACM by several years.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
That was a long time ago, though. I mean, that was in the 1980s that we officially affiliated. One of the reasons was so that we could take advantage of the ACM Distinguished Speakers Program.
Right.
And hi, Harry.
Good morning.
How are you?
Doing all right, doing fine. Yeah, hi Curtis, hi Adam.
Hello.
Adam, Kamsameo, Lukashel,
Coming up very soon, of
getting
course.
ready.
I just try to keep the children under control and stay out of the way of the women in the house. Let them worry about it. That's my job.
It's one of my fondest memories from being a child was getting together with my extended family for Passover Seder, that we otherwise didn't regularly see, sort of distant cousins,
Right.
and just had a great time, running around under the table doing really terrible things, I'm sure, but great memories.
Yeah.
I'm interested. This is a great discussion. I mean, of course, I'm Christian, so I have memories of Easter and Sunday school kids running around looking for Easter eggs or something like Easter eggs, and
It's the season for renewal and rebirth,
it is.
and certainly appropriate, hopefully indicating maybe we'll have a respite from COVID, at least in the West.
There's a lot of things we need a respite from these days.
Yeah, right. Oh man.
I'm hoping it's heading towards respite, although the actual case rate in Santa Clara County is going up slightly. It's
Yeah.
mostly stable, and hospitalizations seem to be going down a little bit. The sewage data, however, are
Terrible.
worrying because they're screaming up.
Yeah.
And I
Well-
just spent Friday and Saturday at the Silicon Valley Regional of the first robotics contest.
Uh-huh.
Like
Oh.
2,000 high school students
Yeah.
in the event center at San Jose State running their robots.
None using APL, however.
None using APL.
That's unfortunate.
Close.
Family with roots in Ukraine?
What?
Where are your family's roots, Adam?
Oh, nobody would be left there anymore. And my family has been out of Eastern Europe for a long time. So, but those that remained in Poland were taken care of, should we say it like that?
Yeah, my family came from southern Poland.
Yeah. So that's how I ended up with my family name in Denmark. My great grandmother wanted to take the family after her husband was killed in a pogrom. She wanted to take the family to America, which in the 1910s you didn't do with a straight flight. You would go to Denmark, then to England, then to America. And then once they reached Denmark, they ran out of money, so they got stuck in Denmark. That's that quarter of my family. My father's mother's family has been in Denmark since the Jews came there originally, so like 350 years. And then my mother's family went to Israel early on, 100 years ago. So
Palestine days, yeah. Cool.
Oh wait, 100 years ago. That'd be the 1920s.
Yeah.
Were there people moving to Israel then?
yeah,
I think Israel was something that kind of got set up in the wake of the Holocaust.
yeah. Well, no, the land of not the country of Israel, but the land of Israel. So the country of Israel was part of the British Mandate of Palestine. So funny enough, as Jewish as they are, my mother's parents' birth certificates say nationality Palestinian, which I find hilarious. They're truly Palestinians because they're born in Palestine as British subjects, second class citizens, different color passports. Anyway,
There was historically, Curtis, a pretty robust movement to settle in Israel, or what is now Israel, for millennia. And the Jews were tossed out various conquering empires, exiled Jews from Israel, and then there was constant series of movements to go back to the homeland, right? The biblically promised homeland, despite these, one after another exiles that took place and so on. So I don't think it ever there never was a pause in that desire to settle in that region.
Of course, I'm totally unaware of all this. Well, you know, we're we live in Christian Gentile protected society.
They had their wars too between
Yes,
one
yes.
sect and another. The Protestants against the Catholics for 30 years. So no one is guiltless in finding reasons to pit one peoples against another.
Boy, how true. The Presbyterian Church in Brookhaven, Long Island, which is, but my mother's summer home was in Brookhaven. And when mother and dad retired, that was where they retired. And so Lucille and I have been going to the Presbyterian Church services in Brookhaven since Zoom and the pandemic, because they got services going early on. And so we're still attending the Zoom services at Old South Haven Presbyterian Church. But anyway, the churches in the Brookhaven Bellport area are watching a BBC documentary on the history of Christianity. It was produced several years ago, but the churches are getting together and watching that documentary. And boy, there were battles.
So I lived in Brookhaven, or across from Brookhaven, permanently for one summer. I was in the town of Shirley, and this is when I was a graduate student in physics. And my experiment was being run at Brookhaven Labs, Brookhaven National Lab, and my, then girlfriend, and myself, just before we got married, rented a cottage on Shirley. It was quite an experience. I mean, I developed deep sympathy for people who live on the coast. The humidity levels were typically 110%. You could wring out your sheets in the air. Nothing ever dried living, on the shore. It was quite an experience.
Yeah, my cousin John said you can bend a potato chip double half an hour after opening the bag.
That's a good expression.
But if you're in Shirley, you can just drive to the beach.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that's a good thing.
I think we could throw a stone to the beach. The Shirley, I guess there was a beach there.
There is, well, they of course built the bridge where the bay was pretty narrow.
Okay.
But of course, I'm not sure. I think we were better off having to sail to the beach.
Hey, Adam, I have an APL question.
Of course.
So to speak. I'm in the process of organizing some books and documents in my house, and I have a large collection of APL symposium proceedings, both some public ones and some IBM internal ones and so on. And the question is there any purpose for my doing anything other than offering them to the recyclery?
Yeah, I would say so. If somehow we can transport them. Dialog does have a library at our office.
Okay.
But that's in London. So how do we get them there? I mean, we'll probably pay the shipping if you can get it done.
I'll look into it.
Well,
Okay.
Harry, don't forget Leonard's Computer History Museum.
Oh yeah, of course. Yes, that too.
There's an APL collection
Okay.
at
Okay.
the museum.
I'll check with Len. That's a good thought, but okay. And if you'd send me though, Adam, the name and address of who at Dialogue would consider that. Let me use that as a plan B.
Yeah, that's a good question. Who does actually run this? Probably Fiona. So, I mean, I can send it to you, or you can just take the email address fiona@dialog.com. Everybody has email addresses like that, I think.
Fiona, okay. Okay, but I'll check with Len first. I don't know what they're. they have a lot of stuff already, so we'll see.
We also, we don't really have a policy at Dialog for it. It's more that, we just have this collection, but we don't have a good way to use it. In principle, people can borrow things from us, but it's not really a real library. So I'm not
Yeah.
really sure how that works.
Oh, that's okay.
I mean,
It's
of all
interesting.
the
I was
journal-
looking at the specs and a video of the cutting edge scanners that scan books.
Mm-hmm.
It's really incredible how they can, take a scan of a book that's not really flat and rectify the image and
Oh, that kind of thing. Yeah.
resolution and do all that in a fraction of a second. You just flip through the pages about as fast as you can, and you're getting good scans. It's wonderful. And you don't have to take the book apart.
Yep.
Because I like having Google Books.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to remember the name of a fellow that I've worked with a lot at the Computer History Museum, who is in sort of in the thick of the APL collection.
Uh-huh. Oh, okay. If it comes to you, let me know.
And certainly, if, it shouldn't be too hard to get documents scanned in fact, I've got some of the, I think the best short introduction to APL was written as part of the IAPL project. And it's, it's never gotten put on the web.
Yeah, that's really what we need to do these days, to somehow get these things such that people can find it. There's a treasure trove of stuff, algorithms and discussions and things like that. And that's all basically lost if it's not available online, right? So that's,
Cleaning out my mother's house has been painful.
what do you say?
Cleaning out my mother's house has been painful.
Yeah, I can
She
imagine.
collected everything. Every letter I wrote home, I think she kept.
Wow.
Now I've reduced that to 27 pounds.
That's not very much. So, yeah, I've tried cleaning out my father's home. That's reducing it to nothing, basically. That's not very fun.
Now, where did your father live?
It's last year's in Sweden. Southern Sweden. But it's more like happenstance he ended up there. But other than that, I mean, he lived the majority of his life in Denmark, and then he has been some in all over the place, I guess. I wasn't around yet. I wish I could have him as a guest. I mean, he wasn't really involved in the development of APL as much. He used APL, but he discovered APL very early. Yeah, he discovered APL very early on, and he became close with Iverson. So, and he was involved in arranging APL conference in Denmark. He would obviously go to the APL conferences. To bring me along to the APL conferences. And Iverson used to visit in Denmark, I think, quite frequently, because IP Sharp had the office in Copenhagen, office for Scandinavia in Copenhagen. And so Iverson would come there as he was with IP Sharp. And then when he was in Denmark, he would come to visit us at home as well. So I guess I've had the pleasure of sitting on Iverson's lap, but when we had Eric Iverson as a guest on the Raycast, then he remembered me. I didn't remember him. He was older than me, so I guess
So, so then how did you get hooked up with Morton and Gitta and their enterprises?
Oh, I
That
mean,
early on, or
I grew up with APL.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
that's
you
well
were in
known.
APL already. I mean, it would have been IBM's APL that you started with. I'm sure. Must have
No,
been.
APL Plus. I mean, it might have been before I can remember, but as far back as I remember, then it was APL Plus. First APL Plus PC, and then APL Plus 2, which was APL2 clone, right? Um, and yeah, I mean, it was always there. I used to sit on my father's lap and he was working sometimes, or play around, and he was doing APL. And he was, when I was 2 years old, so in '87, he bought an IBM PS2 for an awful lot of money, the biggest computer that money could buy, 115 megabyte hard disk. DOS 3 couldn't address that large space. You had to partition it into C, D, E, and F so that it could grasp this vast amount of data space it had. And it had, of course, the Model M keyboard with it, the mechanical keyboard, buckle spring. That's now become popular again. And I said, yeah, I guess I wasn't dressed or something. I once peed into his keyboard when I was 2 years old, into that keyboard. And he just cleaned it out and kept typing on it decades later. So it was, and he used to make little games for me. APL Plus had something called Quad Beep, I think, and Quad Sound. And if you printed the bell character to screen, then it would also beep. So it was quite, dialect doesn't do that, unfortunately. It was quite easy to get effects that would amuse a toddler. They had some rudimentary system for drawing on this graphics on the screen as well. And so in this quad sound, I think it would take like a frequency and a duration, and it would play that note. And so he created these systems for me to play with. Both things that were one-way interactions, where like I could just smash any key on the keyboard and it would draw various things, shapes, colored shapes on the screen, or even smiley faces that were constructed of like a circle and then stenciled out of it like half a circle for the mouth and two little circles for the eyes, things like that. And it would change color and it would play whistly sounds like scales going up and down and things like that. And then as I began to be able to, control my hands, I guess, enough to hit things on the keyboard, then he wrote small APL programs for me and also let me loose on the APL session a little bit. I loved trains at the time. And so I would use APL characters to draw pictures of trains. And then you would, I mean, they're great, right? Circle, you can use a circle for the wheels and a jut for the smaller wheels, and the floor and ceiling are great for various corners on the engine, and they're greater than at the front to make it things like that. Also, because of the character it said it used, there were characters in Quad AV that were like smiley faces as well. Some control characters or something that could be printed like that. And so you could have little stick figures with compress and expand as arms and legs, and quad for a body and things like that. So he introduced me to the characters like that. And then he would write little APL functions to animate these things. And APL Plus had some kind of screen manager. You could draw, right? I think you would output to a matrix to a certain top left corner position or something like that. So it was fairly easy to paint things on the screen to move around. And so we would have like the train coming in, riding across the screen while making the correct train noises using these sound effects things, but they're all APL characters moving around. And then I would sit and I would learn slightly like how to do these kind of things.
Have you been able to save any of those workspaces?
I mean, I have my father's old hard disk. Some of it's probably there. We can find somewhere to plug it in.
Well, that would be something for your kids.
Yeah, I've written things in
making
APL
your
for
own
them.
things for your kids.
Yeah, I write my own things. So, and then he wrote things to like drill a little bit of mathematics. So he'd ask me questions, I had to answer them. He wrote a composition program so that I could type in. So he explained to me, it was pretty cool. I wasn't very old. He explained to me how the well-tempered piano works on the logarithmic scales so that it sounds okay wherever you start, right? And then showed me the APL formulas for computing the tone frequencies, where you have a fixed point that, you know, you have to have a 440 chamber tone for an A and 880 for an octave up, and then you have to fit in the 12 steps there, and then select 7 out of those for a major or minor scale. And then you can give names to those letters, to those tones, and put them in a sequence. You can spell out a melody. And then he wrote a little interactive program running. I was always running in a session, nothing's fancy, where I could go in, start the program, load up an existing melody I had saved, or start composing a new one, and then, or even edit, I think, an existing one. And then I think it would, yeah, it would probably write out to the screen as it was playing things, would write the name of the tone and how long it would last, and you could like illustrate the melodies. And all this code, a lot of it he did with me there. Like, and there's something about it that I didn't like. He would go in and edit the function and just make it whatever I wanted it to be, basically. And so I started experimenting with it on my own, got a little bit familiar with how things worked. Must have taught me some things, but I don't really remember specifically teaching me much as to what various APL primitives did. I think I just picked them up slowly.
Well, you're learning it like, you know, most of us learn our speaking language.
Yeah, it's a natural, for me, it's like more like a natural language. And
I mean, one of the highlights for me of you know, APL conferences was, you know, Ken Iverson and Ray Polivka arguing, this was in Sydney, 1988, arguing over whether there should be APL classes.
in
And-
school. Yeah.
Or, you know, Iverson's argument was that, no, you shouldn't teach APL. You teach math and, you know, bring up the APL when it's helpful in teaching the math.
Ah, I see.
And of course, Ray's career has been teaching
Yeah, yeah,
APL
teaching, yeah.
in classes.
So interesting. Yeah, so for me, it was much more natural like that. Just picking up slowly. I remember visiting Anthony Camacho, speaking of IAPL.
Yeah.
And they got into a fight about whether or not I should have a key map. So he didn't have APL symbols on his keyboards in his house. He had lots of computers there. And he said that you should have a key map to see where the various keys are. And my father made some bet with him about being able to teach me the entire keyboard layout, APL keyboard layout, in an hour or something like that. As a, what was I, 12 years old or something. And so it took that bet up, and then my father succeeded. I did learn the whole keyboard like that because all the mnemonics. So my father would say these things. So interesting. I've later translated or back translated them to English, but I learned it with Danish mnemonics originally for where the various keys are. Although some of them are based in English, obviously knew some English. So some of the things like,
Is the Danish keyboard laid out like the US one, or things moved around like the French keyboard?
no, it's mostly like the English one. It's just punctuation. All the non-numeric and
Right.
alphanumeric keys are somewhat different. Many of them are different, not all of them. But in any case, I was learning the traditional APL keyboard, not unified or modern abominations. The good old thing, Shift A for alpha. And the plain A is an uppercase A. Lowercase letters barely exist. They did, but you have to like press Alt to type them on the PC. And I also learned cool stuff like F over strike L makes an E and things like that. So yeah, yeah, some things were in English, I guess, like ceiling spelled with an S, even though because it's next to down, so up and down like that. But Y and U were in Danish. For Y is the first letter in the word outer, like in outer space. So it points up to outer space, and U points down to the underworld. So it's up and down arrows, things like that. And I learned that it's just, actually, I do have an APL keyboard with symbols on it, but it's more as a curiosity and to see if it was good quality to recommend it to others. I don't actually need it. So the only thing that gives me trouble is delta underscore. It's so rare and it's in a weird position on the dialect keyboard. And so then I remember being, I don't know, maybe 13 years old. My father's just leaving me at an APL session unsupervised. And it went okay. I mean, I got tired eventually. And I got extremely frustrated because I forgot how to sign off from APL. I tried everything. Exit, close, stop. Nothing of it worked. I forgot that it was off. Um,
Right.
but and I would experiment with all these things, and little by little, I guess I just made more and more sophisticated things, and my father would show me things. Yeah, I remember him showing me some things, including compatibility issues between APL2 and APL1. Things like 1, 2, 3 square bracket 2, where APL2 requires you to parenthesize the vector and APL1 doesn't. So there's actually something that's not compatible. And I learned a lot of history. And maybe the most important lesson of all, if you want to know why something is, then ask Paul Berry. Look in his manual.
Oh, so I'm really frustrated at not being able to get Paul Berry to.
We'll
to-
get him eventually. We just need to pressure him enough. Yeah, so he was like an idol of my childhood. Others might have had superheroes. I had APL heroes.
I recall Paul's agreed to speak, just when.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, I have a few people that have agreed to speak, but they they
Can't
just
get
have,
around.
yeah, can't get
around
them
to
to
it.
sign up to something like that. And so I played around with APL when I was like in my teens and I was in high school. I built pretty sophisticated things. I also experimented with other programming languages and with mixed success. They often had uh, benefits that the APLs didn't have because they were better integrated to do certain things. I used something in what was that? There was some database system that used some odd form of Pascal or something. And it was well integrated with the whole database system. I wasn't very interested in the database, but it had some very neat things about some screen paging thing where you could write to write full screen applications in text mode. You could write to a certain page, and then once you were done, then you could switch whatever was actually shown on the screen with what you had painted until now. So instead of painting little pieces and the user would see things flickering, you could finish a whole screen and then switch. That was pretty neat. But I couldn't express myself in the proper way because APL's power of of expression was awkward. I wrote things in BASIC, which was nice for writing things in colors to certain places on the screen, but it was very difficult to do things uh, and computing things. I programmed in Word macros. When Microsoft Word had its own macro language, that was not BASIC. But then I kept going with APL. I wrote little games and things in high school. And it just kept it up and I guess I slowly became better at doing things without noticing because it was just a game. It was just for fun. I guess I knew my father did it for work, but I didn't really associate it with a work type of thing.
Well, didn't it help you with your school arithmetic and algebra?
My father blamed the mistake I made on a math test on me having done too much APL, not doing in the proper order of execution in traditional mathematics. Um, I it did. By the time I reached high school, it definitely did because by then I was totally thinking in arrays and the equivalences between functions and I have some funny stories for that. I couldn't really use APL in school because laptops weren't really so much a thing and couldn't have them around anyway. I had a graphing calculator from Texas Instruments. And well, yeah, so they are programmed in Texas Instruments Basic as well.
Well, that must have been frustrating when you have APL and, a plotting workspace.
Yes, but on the other hand, some programming languages can actually do a lot of array-based things, but people are just not used to it and it doesn't get exposed much. And sometimes you have to go through hoops to actually use it, but they do have
Oh,
functional arrays.
Excel. I mean, Excel is crazy if you're trying to do anything with arrays.
Excel, yeah, no, that's not what I mean. But even some things like JavaScript, when I write JavaScript, which I have to do a fair bit, my JavaScript doesn't look like JavaScript. It looks like strange things. People who do JavaScripts can't read it. I guess I write JavaScripts kind of like, no, I shouldn't hold myself to such a level, but maybe my JavaScript looks a little bit in the direction compared to normal JavaScript as what Arthur Whitney C looks to normal C.
I was
Yeah.
thinking about Arthur Whitney when you started on that.
Yeah, if you've ever have a look at his code, it's like, it doesn't look like C. So yeah, so when I write JavaScript, I will heavily use arrays and mapping and for eaches and things like that are just noise, because what I actually want to get to is all the array stuff and filtering and so on. And so too in TI Basic, even more limited. But what I found was that it was inconsistent. I mean, we know that about programming languages, but it was inconsistent. You could have arrays or lists as they were. You had Boolean operators like and or. If you try to do a list, so and it had Booleans, I think true and false, but of course 0 and 1 would work as well. If you try to do a list of values, trues and falses, and then the logical operator and another list of trues and falses, it would just give some kind of error. It doesn't know how to do that. If you used multiplication, it would work. It could multiply two lists element-wise. Now, I was quick to realize, of course, that multiplication and are the same thing. There is no difference for Booleans. And then we have some law, what is it called? De Morgan's laws or something like that. Not is just 1 minus. And or is and under not. Meaning under or dual, whatever you call it from J. So if you do 1 minus left argument, 1 minus the right argument, then multiply them together and do 1 minus the result, you've got an or. So now I've got and I've got or, I've got not. I'm well equipped to do Boolean array manipulation. And so for some tests in high school, we were allowed to use graphical calculators, and for some tests not, depending on what exactly we were being taught, and to demonstrate we could do things by heart or not. I remember I noticed that in chemistry, we always had these formula calculation things, and there was like 3 parts to them, and you would always have 2 knowns and 1 unknown, and you had to calculate the third to balance the formulas or something. They was often disguised, but it was always came back to these 3. So I asked if I could have my calculator with me for my chemistry test. And they said, fine, as long as you clear the memory before you go in. So that's too bad. But what I did then was I spent the first part of my chemistry test writing a program to solve the rest of the test so that I wouldn't make any mistakes by hand calculating. It's much safer to let the calculator do it. And then, but I mean, there wasn't much APL in that. Then we had philosophy, and we had a philosophy test. And I asked if I can take my calculator with me for my philosophy test. And they like looked at me as like, it doesn't say anything here about not being allowed to take your calculator, but nobody has asked that before. And so they they said, yeah, sure, you can take the calculator to the philosophy test, whatever, you just, clear the memory. So that, I mean, because you could put text into your calculator, so you could have things you have to remember. And what I wanted it for was part of the philosophy test, where these giant statements in Swedish, it was making some kind of description or claim, and then we had to see if this statement was internally consistent or tautology or something like that. Flash Gordon does this and that, and it's raining and whatever, not things like that. And so what I did, since I knew how to define the and or and not in terms of arithmetic rather than in terms of formal logic, because it could only handle one bit at a time, I would define those three, and then I would simply write I would just write lists of Boolean all possibilities. So if the first variable, I would see how many variables there were in total, 2 to the power of that. Define lists of that length. First variable 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. Second one 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, so on. Boolean counter, could do it by hand. It's not that much work. And then simply type in the entire thing. The expression would probably be a screen and a half or two. And using the arithmetic equivalent of the Booleans, and then I get a giant 32 element list back or whatever it was, and there was a 1 in there, so it's possible. Done. Answer on the test. Right? That's brute force array programming to the rescue at the philosophy test. So
That is a really cool story.
That's good.
So yeah, I aced that test. Thanks to APL, I guess. Because that's the thing, right? If you're used to true is the word true and false is the word false, or T and a F, I think you do something to keep it short. And these Boolean operations that can only handle one bit at a time, you never get to this point, right? And if you don't have iota either, or in any way of representing Boolean all combinations as the encode of that, you never jump to the conclusion that you can actually use this to help you.
Right.
So, yeah.
Did they allow you to use the calculator in future exams after that first one?
We only had one course in philosophy, so it wasn't relevant. What was it I wrote? Oh, right. So based on that, I thought this is interesting, right? I can use multiplication and one minus and so on this way, and define logic based on arithmetic. Now this, and I knew this.
Did you actually build functions in the calculator? Did it have symbolic functions? Or
It
did
didn't. It had programs that could do things. I think I don't remember. I think for my test that I literally would just write in times and one minus, because I think if I use programs, I couldn't call them inline dyadically, and I can't live without infix syntax.
So you drill down to the arithmetic equivalent.
Yeah, I think so. I might have written it up on paper first to make sure I got it right. I don't know. You can move the insertion point and insert things, so it's not so bad. So if you want an or in the middle, so now let's start by writing multiplication and then go to both sides, add parentheses, one minus, and then go all the way to the left and write one minus before that. So based on that, I started exploring this, and I found it interesting. And so there's this idea from APL of extending the domain. You take one concept from mathematics and then generalize it so that the matrix product or vector product and so on becomes what we call inner product, which you can use with any two functions, not just plus and times. And the same thing, sum and product, we generalize them to become reduction, and so on and so on. And a lot of things APL generalizes, like 0 divided by 0, whatever the value should be, but we generalize from something that's not defined to something being defined. And I thought, well, this is interesting. That kind of begs the question of what happens if I plug in values into these formulas that are not 0 or 1? Right? What happens? And I discovered that works very well. That's probability math. Right? If there's a 30%
values between 0 and 1.
Between 0 and 1, yeah. So if there's a 30% chance of me bringing an umbrella, right, and there's a 50% chance of rain, what's the chance that I'm going to get wet, right? So 30%, that means not is 1 minus 0.3 is 0.7 times. So, and it's raining. It has to be that I don't have the umbrella, right? And it does rain. So it's the 0.7 times 0.5, 0.35, 35% chance that I'm going to get wet. And discovered that because I had to use arithmetic instead of logic because the stupid calculator.
Okay, so you didn't get a domain error because you weren't actually using.
Exactly, because the stupid calculator didn't know how to do vector arithmetic with or vector logical manipulation. They only knew arithmetic. So I had to just push me to discover that. APL didn't do that, right? And the NOR doesn't mean that, but it could have. Right. Not gives a domain error in APL if you use it on anything other than 0 and 1. It could have. And so I wrote a paper in philosophy on even though I mean philosophy was a tiny course, but we had to write something, and I wrote this giant paper about extending formal logic to the 0 to 1 domain, of non-integer domain, and how it allowed for probability math and defined each operator, went through the whole thing. So that was pretty cool.
Nice.
And yeah, the philosophy teacher loved that. Obviously got the highest grade in that course. So
the philosophy teacher, was he a mathematician or a
no, but he knew formal logic. I don't think he was a mathematician.
Yeah. I mean, once upon a time, if you wanted to learn logic, you didn't go to the math department or the computer department. You went to the philosophy department.
Yeah, of course. No, I later studied a little bit of philosophy in university, and we had formal logic there as well, which is kind of a pity because then these people don't realize what they're missing. Anyway, then in mathematics, so we had as part of high school, we also had to write one final paper that we could do from like any subject from anything that we had been studying in high school. So I chose mathematics. I got delayed. I didn't finish my paper until months after we had finished high school. Everybody had graduated already. And I got delayed because they couldn't find a teacher that could be the supervisor for my paper. But they got somebody who used to be a mathematics professor at university to be the supervisor for me. And so I wrote a paper. I was in Swedish, but entitled something like "Can our mathematical notation be improved?" Interesting enough, usually when you use a title that's a question, the answer is no, but mine was yes. It can. And so I went through a lot of examples between traditional mathematical notation and APL and showed how APL is just clearly superior. That's why I had to have somebody who could actually understand what I was writing to guide me in the thing. So that went okay. That was fine. And yeah, at home I wrote my father had tons of papers at home and books and things, and he could never find the right things at the right time. So I wrote a giant cataloging system for him. Whole thing with not graphical, but text-based user interface. Well, I say text-based, though at the time this was running on the DOS, or at least a DOS terminal emulator on the Windows if it was. APL plus 2 liked running on the Windows. It was much faster than. And the DOS terminals then, 25 rows, 80 columns, based on punch cards, of course. They used these character sets depending. You could actually set different sizes. It didn't have to be 25 rows by 80 columns. You could also have you could also run in double width characters with 40 columns. You could run on the other size. You could push in more rows up to like 50 rows on a screen with tiny little characters. For each one of these were defined by a character set, a soft character set on VGA screens at least. And so for the normal fonts, it would be an 16 by 8 bit character box, though there were actually 9 bits in the width for every character, but the 8th column would be replicated. So that would be used for character spacing, and then box drawing characters would draw into that column and it would be extended 1 more pixel so that box drawings were contiguous. How did it work? I think my father helped with this, with decoding the format for this. So there were these soft fonts that you could start. And so there would just like be a little program that would push its font to the 256 times 16 times 8 bits to the screen, and then it would draw that. And APL Plus used such a system for that. And I don't remember exactly how that happened. I guess my father decoded that. It was very simple. And once we had the internal format for this, then we could hack the font and make the characters look whichever way we wanted. There were always some characters I wasn't happy with. And so I did this multiple times. I don't know why exactly, but I kept writing over and over again a better and better font editor. It's like a full screen font editor written in APL so that I could use APL to design my fonts, and it would like hot swap the fonts. So as I would be defining the font in my editor, it would change the shape of the characters that were used in the editor itself. And so I would create special fonts for special purposes, including corners and strategic graphical elements, so that I could put things together in various tones of gray, and it would look like drop shadows and nice corners and things like that. And so it looked like a GUI, virtually indistinguishable from actual GUI, but it was all character based anyway. And I wrote cataloging systems. My father taught me how to implement databases in APL. People often ask me, how do you do hash map in APL? Well, you don't. What you do instead is you have one array per column, and you use IOTA, and that's it. That's how you look up things. And then you get an answer which row it is, and you use that row number, and you look into a different array, and then you can do relational databases. Easy peasy. Who needs dictionaries anyway? And so I use that for looking things up. Then.
Now, did you ever use a 2741, a typewriter type terminal, or you were at the PC by the time you were?
Yeah, I was born in 85.
Yeah.
PCA was all the rage by the time I had anything to say at 2 years old or something.
Old fashioned.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean we didn't have.
You remember the 2741 term. You remember
Oh, yeah. I had one on loan
in your office.
I had one on loan that I carried around in a big plastic case.
I mean, the reason I mentioned that is, when Adam mentions, drawing fonts with box characters, the very first fine plot ball that I experienced was one that had, dots and then a bunch of corner characters that could be used to construct boxes and letters.
Yeah, there were things like that. So no, I never used that really. My father had a beautiful burgundy Selectric at home, but he didn't use it even when I was little. I mean, he might have before I was 2 years old. I don't remember. But even when I was little, he used his computer to connect to remote systems. He used the PC as a terminal. Phone lines at the time didn't use this whatever the system developed by Ericsson is called, that people don't even think about when they use today, the dual tone thing. They used rotary. What?
DTMF.
Okay, CMF, dual tone. Yeah, okay. Something. So at the time, phones were rotary phones, or they were fancy rotary phones that had buttons on them, but they were actually rotary phones in the sense that you press a button, you would set 7 pulses to the system. Right. I remember my mother would play with that. If you hung up the phone and picked it up again quickly enough, you could have it dial instead, because it's just cutting the line. And so in order to communicate with computers on the side, my father had this little box that kind of looked like a modern day, well, not modern, that modern, but a phone it had the 12 buttons for the keypad, but no screen, no number, nothing. The only thing it did was it would play music. I used to play with it, and my father told me to stop, not to use up the batteries in it. But he would hold that over to the phone line and then push the buttons to send 2 tones at a time to the remote system to communicate with it until the handshaking was done, and then the computer could take over. As the computer would play, all the modem sounds. We know this, right? And then they can speak with each other. You can turn off the sound.
Sounds like a blue box
And
that would send any of the tones.
yeah, well,
Free long distance calls on the US Bell system.
so yeah, so this is what my father would use. He had dot matrix printer hooked up to something as well, and then later he got this laserjet printer, and then that era was gone. But I used to play with the leftover infinite paper, stripping off, or I would get the edges of them with the holes.
I'm going to sign off now. Next project.
Thank you for
Wish
coming,
you
Harry.
all, happy holidays,
You too.
Passover, Easter, or Ramadan, as you choose.
Season's greetings, right?
Pick one. Season's greetings, right? Curtis, great seeing you. Adam, always a pleasure.
See you.
See you around.
Bye now.
So, so this was in high school. I did these very small projects. Then, yeah, I went to university briefly. And wasn't the philosophy studies weren't very interesting. And then
Well,
eventually,
let's see. You must have learned Hebrew early on.
no, not much. Not
Oh,
much.
really?
My family wasn't religious,
Oh, oh.
traditional. And
So
so,
what was your major in college?
well, I didn't even take anything like decide anything like that. In Sweden, it was also possible just to take courses. So I just started studying philosophy, one course at a time. And I took the first half-year course, finished that, and then I never came back again after the summer. Started in the winter. So half-year courses. And I went to California, became a hippie, and in Big Sur. And then eventually, whatever, long story, but eventually I ended up at a synagogue in San Francisco, and I became religious. And eventually I went to yeshiva, to rabbinical school in New York. And so I was busy studying there, but I would always do a little bit of APL on the side. I used to help in the office. They had all these donors that had given to the school, and they had an utter mess of the lists of people and email addresses and whatever not. And APL is, of course, as we know, it's great for data munging and cleaning up data and so on. And so I would take all these lists and I would put it all together and use APL to clean up the mess. So happy for they didn't know it was what was involved, whatever. It's just something they did. And then in my room I had my laptop and I was playing around with APL just for the fun on the side. Oh, I don't know how I even got this idea of it, but as an example, my roommate was also into computers, and he would ask me questions about APL. He was getting into programming, and he even showed me various programming languages. And anything he showed me, I would just go, meh, not interesting. He's like, yeah, but read this introduction to Ruby. Like Ruby is amazing. And I'm starting reading about Ruby's type system, and there are tuples and there are lists, and some are mutable and some are not mutable, and well, that means you're trying to add a number and then you updated the original one. What a mess. Can't have that. And now I would write things in APL, and then he would ask me things like you do edge detection, things like that, and show how okay, so you do a vertical rotate and horizontal rotate, and you basically you're there, right? So and then I wrote other fun stuff. I remember I wrote like a train simulator, like a train line simulator. So I would use these box drawing characters to draw a train line or like the network. And then I would have little boxes that were the trains, all stylized like that. It looked like something I had seen on the wall at the train control center in Copenhagen, like little boxes moving around and signals changing colors and things like that. And so I wrote something like that, and then I had APL decide for every train what to do at every time slice. So it would stop at red signal. The signals would turn red if a train was in the way on a certain section of the track. And then if another train came from the side, it would stop at the red signal and wait until the red signal would switch to green signal and it would go and things like that. And that was kind of fun. And then eventually, whatever, 5 years, 7 years later, I found myself living in Montreal. And only really reason to be there is that's where the community that my wife came from was from. And so I worked as a secretary for a fundraiser there. I think I used APL a little bit also. He also had mess in his things. Lots of Microsoft Access databases and a ton of my Excel spreadsheets, and had to reconcile it all. Used APL for some computations, if I remember right. And then I could translate APL formulas so into giant Excel formulas, completely unwieldy. But once I know what it is I'm trying to write, then I can translate it, and they can never change it again because it's. So I made these amazing Excel spreadsheets to compute things, and what was his share of the fundraising, and what did we have to send to Israel, and yeah, things like that. And then while I was living there, yeah, I had stopped by actually. I was for a brief period, I was in Denmark, and I went to England for a week, and I stopped by the dialogue offices there, encouraged by Keith and Morton. And so that goes back. So how do I get into that with Keith and Morton was we kind of grew up together.
But no, was it dialogue or dyadic systems then?
It was dialogue. It's not so long time ago. But it was fairly recent, I guess, relatively speaking, that Keith and Morton had taken over and it became dialogue. So we grew up together, right? My father would be very involved in APL things, and my mother would come along. I would come along to APL conferences. Keith and Morton were there as well. They were competitors with my father. They were doing APL consulting, so definitely competing. But that doesn't mean that it was somewhat friendly. And I grew up together. So I have a sister 4 years younger than me, and Keith and Morton have a son my age and a daughter 4 years younger. So we grew up together. And it's just to go and play by each other, and I would sleep over at the house. So, but it was nothing to do with APL. It was just, friends. So, but that means they knew about me, and they knew that my father had taught me APL. And there at the time, Dan Baronet worked for Dialogue and he lived in Montreal. And then they would come and visit, and they would visit maybe Brian Becker in outside of Buffalo. And then since they were there anyway, they came to visit me. I was supposed to I visited Dialogue or the Inside Systems offices in Denmark years before that, but I wasn't ready to do it. My father died at the time. I just had a child. I just left from Canada. My life was a mess. I didn't have the capacity to deal with anything at the time. So that kind of faded out. But then they came back to me, and they knew that I knew some APL. I'd been visiting them before, and they knew that my father taught me. And they came to visit in Montreal and said, like, maybe you can, after all, start working for us. And then, yeah, then I started working part-time for them. I still had my normal job, and I started visiting Dan Baronet at home. I'd go visit, and he would teach me dialect system and the things that he was working on. Became a protege like that. And slowly I started doing more and more for dialect. They liked my work, I guess. I remember Morton saying, if I want to be a hero overnight, then I should write a system that allowed people to take their settings with them from one version to the next version when they needed to upgrade. So I wrote that user command called copyreg together with Dan Baronet, at least people like that. I got into writing the user commands and part of the tools group, and we have meetings in Montreal, and I got all involved in lots of stuff. Started working more and more. And eventually the fundraising business that I worked for, didn't really work out so well. It's a one-man company other than me as the secretary, and he was getting old. And and Dialog came with offers saying like they wanted me to work more for them. That I should maybe move to England. It would help. I moved to England so I could be close by the headquarters. Morton wanted to set up a APL shop, basically make young APL developers going out to companies and things in England. That never really worked out, but that was the idea. And so I relocated to London. Not long time after that, Dan Bernay passed away. And all of those things that he had, well, he died in a traffic accident.
Who?
Dan Bernay did.
Oh, Dan Barnett.
Yeah.
A motorcycle accident.
Yes.
Yeah. Mhm.
We joke sometimes that in software there's the bus factor. How many people can we lose without things going bad? Right? You get run over by hit by a bus, and then that literally happened. He got hit by a motorhome. But that's I was just ready enough to take over all those things. All of a sudden, all of his things fell on me because he had been teaching me his things, all the user commands and tools and things like that. A lot of the things I think just disappeared with him, but some of it at least just fell on me. And so all of a sudden I was deeply integrated into the work that I was doing. So.
Well, now let's say you got passport restrictions. You said you wouldn't be able to come to the Dialog user meeting.
If it was in the United States. That's not because I'm something with my passport separately. It's just a silly thing. When I lived in New York, and my wife is American, and I was working on getting my green card, and I knew that as long as I stayed in the United States, then it doesn't matter if my permission to stay runs out. As long as you make the green card, then everything just becomes natural. I could just stay. So while I was working on the green card, but before I had the green card application ready, a friend of mine in Montreal asked me to come and help him in the court case. And so I went, and I thought I could rely on the system that a status in America doesn't have to be given up by going to Canada. You can kind of stay in America or go to Canada and then come back again. And when I wanted to go back to America, back home, then they wouldn't let me back in again because I had overstayed by a few weeks my 6 month permission to stay. So that's the deal.
So what is your official citizenship?
Oh,
now?
I'm Danish.
You're Danish, and you're living in Denmark now.
Now I'm living in Denmark. I just moved a month and a half ago. Moved back to Denmark. So, and then I stopped working for Dialog and I started working for Insight Systems, which is the same thing. So I'm doing the same thing, just at a new.
So Insight Systems still exists as.
It exists on paper. Right? It exists as in like officially Dialog is in England, Insight Systems is in Denmark. In reality, it's one thing. Right? But that means I get my salary now from Insight Systems instead of from Dialog, or at least my next salary will be.
Well, Jen and Morten, they're in Copenhagen, aren't they?
They're in Elsinore, yeah.
That Denmark.
Yeah. Sure, but that's they're not separable, the two companies, right? The CEO and the CTO of Dialog are Insight employees that are being hired out by Insight to Dialog. There's some billing going on back and forth there, but for all intents and purposes, it's one thing. So yeah, so that's how I ended up working with all these things. And I've always been fascinated by the history of APL because it's like been around me very much.
You grew up with it.
What do you say?
You grew up with it.
Yeah, I did. And I'm hearing all the stories and hearing about all the people. And seeing the people, I guess. So. Well, this was unexpected.
Campfire's a real keeper.
Yeah, well, I didn't. So I guess I'm the
Story
guest.
About what you were doing in high school and using a Texas instrument under the influence of APL is wonderful. I mean, I was thinking that would make a really great talk for Minnowbrook.
Yeah, if I could get there and if it happens. But hey, I didn't know what was going to happen today because we didn't have a guest as we have next time. But I guess I became the guest today then.
Yes, you did.
let's be in contact, right? Let's be in contact about
Sure.
the next episode, and let's do some branding so that you can count it as yours as well.
Mhm.
And then let's try
Get
to
right
put,
to work on bugging Paul.
well, now certainly this poll we will get, right? Paul Jackson,
Oh,
he's definitely
Jackson, yes,
coming,
yeah.
and
yes,
we'll
definitely.
brand that as an ACM APL bug, uh, special APL Campfire event.
Mhm.
The APL bug, or maybe there'll be a bug around the APL fire. Yeah, I'll mock something up with a background picture. And then let's see if we can put pressure on all the Smiths to come and be guests here.
Okay, well,
Fine.
see,
Thank you so much for coming, Curtis. I wouldn't have been speaking about this if you hadn't asked me. So that's great.
okay,
Talk to you.
okay, goodbye.